Hi, welcome back everybody from that short break. I think we're running just a couple of minutes behind schedule, so we're going to just take a short break and get right back into it. So for our final session of the 2020 San Joaquin River Restoration Program Science Meeting, we will present a series of pop-up talks. So this is a series of fast-paced 5-minute talks that will give you a short introduction to a variety of different topics. Now, we will have time for questions for the entire group of pop-up talks at the end of the session. So if you have a question, as you've been doing the whole time, please either submit it in writing in the GoToMeeting chat, which you may do at any time during the presentations, or wait until all the presenters have finished speaking to raise your hand and verbally ask a question during the open Q&A at the end. And again, we'll hold questions for this entire group of presenters until the end of all 10 talks. And with that, I'd like to start with our first presentation from Francis Ulep from River Partners. Francis, it's all yours.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Francis Ulep. I'm a restoration biologist with River Partners. I'm based out of our Turlock office. I'm here to talk to you all about our invasive weed removal project we have going on the San Joaquin River. Before I get started, I just want to give a big thank you to the Bureau of Reclamation, who's provided us the funding to do this project, and the San Joaquin River Parkway and Conservation Trust, who's the primary grant recipient for this, that have allowed River Partners to be to have this sub-agreement to get our hands dirty and do this work. Also, special thank you to the Cesar Chavez Environmental Corps, who's on the ground doing the physical removal. And with that said, let's dive into the weeds of things. So this is actually the third iteration of this project. Everything started back in 2011. And since then, River Partners and the Trust have been removing invasive weeds from Reach 1 to 5. So that's Frying Dam all the way down to the confluence of the Merced. For this phase of the project, we've been mainly focused on Reach 1, so the Trust on 1A and River Partners on 1B. On 1B, most of the land that we've been doing this removal on has been private ag land. And so here's just here's a map that I have from ArcGIS, just showing what it looks like after we've done some mapping. So the red here is Red Cispania, the orange Arundo, and there's a few black dots out there, which are just biologically sensitive areas that we have our ground crews avoid. And so the main goal of this project is to remove our 6 targeted weeds. So we have Arundo or giant reed, Red Cispania, salt cedar, Chinese tallow, yellow star thistle, and then perennial pepperweed. When I think about this project, I like to break it down into 5 steps. So the first and most important one is that landowner outreach, so we can access the land to do this work. So our main tool has been word of mouth. We've been lucky enough to partner up with a few landowners that are well known in the area, that have great relationships with their neighbors and have been able to show off the work that the Trust and River Partners have been doing. And we've also learned that having like a trusted third-party source, such as RCDs or attending Farm Bureau meetings, have been huge for us, because when you pitch, to a private landowner, hey, we want to do this work on your land, it's completely free, just, give us access, some people can get a little skeptical. Once you get site access, then the biologists come in and we do our biological surveys, just making sure that the work that we're doing isn't going to have a direct adverse effect to the different wildlife in the area, especially any teeny species that might be found in the river corridor. From there, this step is kind of simultaneous with the last. We do our pre-treatment mapping. So we're on the ground looking for every and any invasive weed on our list. And then we're marking all of that up on Esri's collector app, and then processing that data and then sending it over to our field manager. From there, we move on to our most time-intensive and labor-intensive step, which is the actual removal. River Partners has various methods, just depending on what species we're removing. For example, with Arundo, we're going in with chainsaws, cutting down that stand, then pulling all that material out of the floodway, the river channel, and then allowing it to sit in a pile and completely dry out. During that drying out process, we're going back and we're spraying any shoots or any recruits that might come off. And then once everything is completely dry in that mound, we'll actually mulch it and then spread all that dry, dead material on the landscape. And then the last step, which you can go like 5, 6, is the post-treatment mapping and then the retreatment. And here's just a cool snapshot that we saw. I believe it was either a box elder or an Oregon ash that the arundo was actually growing right through. Oh, here we go. Oh, just going back really quick. Here's just a couple of shots of River Partners and the Cesar Chavez Environmental Corps doing work out on the river. And so as far as, you know, we broke ground on this project June 2020 of this year. So far we have, there you go. So far we've mapped around 5 acres of arundo and about an acre of Suspania, and we've treated 1.2 acres of that arundo. And this photo took me forever to take, and it's the same exact photo as the last. Hopefully I can go back to it. So 3 months, this is 3 months difference. So it's incredible to see how the landscape changes when we're able to get in there and do the work. I'd like to thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoy the other talk.
Thanks, Francis. That was a great talk. Appreciate it. So next up, we have Sothea Oeun from the California Department of Water Resources. And I think, Kirsten, you were going to control that one.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning into the Van Clief Diversion Fish Passage Project, where you'll be provided with a quick introduction to the project area, and we'll also take a look at some conceptual features that we're currently considering and evaluating for the project. So here's a map of the entire restoration area taken directly from the program's website. As you can see, the diversion takes place at the downstream end of the east side bypass, the segment in green. It's about a mile or so upstream from the bypass's confluence with the San Joaquin River. This next slide shows the existing conditions of the project site, and it also shows how the diversion works. The diversion is a pretty simple concept with 2 main features, a concrete rubble weir and a pump. The rubble weir, shown on the top right photo, is located downstream of the pump and is used to raise the water surface high enough upstream so that water reaches the pump intake, allowing the diversion to pump water when needed. However, these 2 diversion features impede fish passage. First, we have the rubble weir, which exceeds the recommended drop and velocity for salmon passage at low flows. And then we have the pump, which is unscreened. This increases the risk of fish entrainment, meaning that fish can accidentally get sucked into diversion and won't be able to continue migrating. The photo doesn't show much of an opening, but our plans show that the opening should be about 3 feet in height. So unless the riser has been modified since then, we think that the intake was plugged with sediment at the time this photo was taken. So with these existing conditions, we gave the project 2 main goals. The first is to improve fish passage, and the second is to make sure that we don't negatively impact the diversion, so that the diversion can continue to operate at the same capacity. One of the ways we approached researching concepts was by looking at the issue from a fish passage standpoint. Is there a way we can possibly modify or retrofit these existing features that allow fish to safely pass the diversion? First, we have the weir. There are several publications that address this sort of feature, and some alternatives include a rock ramp and step pools as listed here. But the constraint with most of these alternatives is that they might not be able to pass other fish species, especially those that can't jump, like sturgeon, for example. So in this case, we may be limited to selecting something like a rock ramp, which won't require fish to jump. Next, we have the pump intake. The problem is that it's unscreened. A simple solution would be to place a screen at the intake, but this is where our biggest constraint for the project comes in. As shown in the photo, this location may be highly prone to sedimentation. If sedimentation occurs on the screen, it will increase the risk of fish impingement, meaning that fish could get stuck on the surface of the screen because of increasing velocities. So sediment could be a big problem for both fish passage and the diversion. Because of possible sedimentation issues at the intake, we took another approach at researching concepts, but now from a diversion standpoint. So we asked ourselves, is there a way we can possibly upgrade the entire diversion with a new design, perhaps at a different location that's nearby and isn't as prone to sedimentation? If we take this path, there could be several opportunities, such as the possibility to remove the rubble weir, and maybe also provide a more sustainable diversion that could work with the natural hydraulic and geomorphic conditions of the site. This will benefit both fish passage and the diversion. By understanding these natural conditions, we can place the intake in a location where the hydraulics could work for both fish passage and the diversion while avoiding an area of sedimentation. One of the concepts we're looking at for this upgraded diversion is from a previous DWR project using a self-cleaning retrievable screen. This would allow the operator to raise and lower the screen when needed and also help keep the screen clear from sediment. It could also prevent damages from occurring to the screen when the diversion isn't in use. So right now, we are currently in the early conceptual phase for the project as we work on evaluating the feasibility of this concept and others, and we hope to have a concept selected for design soon. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your time, and I hope you all stay safe out there. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sothea. All right. These are fast-paced talks for sure. Up next, we have Haley Mirts from River Partners. And yeah, hey, Haley. And then I think, is Kirsten going to be controlling the screen for you, or are you going to be controlling your presentation?
I think Kristen is going to hand over control to me.
There we go.
There we go.
Nice.
All right. So my name is Haley Mirts. I'm the restoration ecologist for River Partners in the San Joaquin Valley. And this is just going to be a quick overview of our work at Ball Ranch, which is a project that will be starting here in 2021. And so just off the bat, I'd like to say a quick thank you to our collaborators in case I don't have time for it at the end. There's a lot of organizations, funders, and shareholders who make our riparian restoration work possible, and we wouldn't be able to do this work without their influence and involvement. And so just to get a quick introduction to what the property is, Ball Ranch is a 378-acre property that's composed of 2 adjacent state-owned properties, the Willow Unit, which is managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Ball Ranch proper, which is operated by the San Joaquin River Conservancy. It's approximately 5 miles downstream from Fresno Dam in Fresno County and just northeast of the town of Fresno itself. The floodplain here is approximately 1.5 miles long, and right now the property is primarily surrounded by agriculture, notably cattle grazing that occurs surrounding the site. And Ball Ranch itself has had a pretty unique history. It's been gravel mined consistently since the 1940s, and as you can see from the historic photos here on the right, it was heavily used for not only mining, but also agriculture, including worm farming. And so we're really excited to have the opportunity to restore this habitat back to its historic use, which is both riparian forest and valley oak woodland. And so the work that we're going to be doing at Ball Ranch has several main goals, one of which is to create additional habitat for threatened and endangered species, many of which rely upon these riparian habitats, which are being lost throughout the Central Valley. And so there's species like the California tiger salamander, which has extant populations in properties surrounding Ball Ranch. There are riparian reliant songbird species, so the least-billed vireo and the yellow-billed cuckoo are here. And then of course, the Chinook salmon as well. In addition to these species, there's dozens of other both listed and non-listed species that we're hoping to target, including bats, neotropical migrant birds, and wintering waterfowl. The second goal of the restoration efforts at Ball Ranch is going to be promoting the goals, objectives, and policies identified in the San Joaquin River Parkway Master Plan, which is put together by the San Joaquin River Conservancy. And so part of this plan is going to be increasing habitat connectivity along the San Joaquin River, both for the benefit of people and the environment. And we're really excited to get to play a role in the development of this larger riparian corridor. With any river restoration project, there's of course challenges, and one of the big ones that we have at Ball Ranch is invasive species removal. You got to hear a little bit about that from Francis. And Ball Ranch itself has several species that we're hoping to target, including tree of heaven, starred thistle, eucalyptus, tamarisk, and tree of heaven. This involves some real partnerships with not only Fish and Wildlife, who own the adjacent willow unit, but also with the folks at Cemex who have some of these invasive species harbored on their property. There's also the challenge of creating functional wildlife habitat while maintaining the future utility of a public recreation space. So as part of the San Joaquin River Parkway, it's going to be open for public usage, and people already are out there fishing in some of the stocked gravel ponds that have been left behind. And so it's being able to manage both a restored area and things that people like to come and visit these sites for. We're hoping to create a climate smart restoration, which considers both potential climate change impacts and incorporates ecological redundancies that are robust enough to ensure against future conditions with climate change. And we kind of saw this firsthand in 2014 when Ball Ranch burned, partially due to some of the non-native grasses that are found on the site. And then one of the final goals of the work at Ball Ranch is going to be our side channel and floodplain enhancement projects. And this will be to improve the quality and the quantity of suitable spawning and rearing habitat for spring run salmon. We're along Reach 1A of the San Joaquin River Restoration Program, which is a primary spawning area for Chinook salmon and is also used extensively for rearing of juvenile fish. So we're going to be working closely with MBK Engineering to select ideal placements for not only a side channel, but openings for the floodplain enhancement project happening down here on the south end of the property. We have main goals of improving floodplain connectivity and are hoping to place some ripple crests and augment some targeted areas with the main stem to increase available spawning material. And so with that, we're kind of looking towards the next steps, which start in 2021 with the restoration of phase 1A, which will be this big green area here, which is the first step in habitat restoration and river restoration, and will set the baseline for our side channel work to be started in the future. And so with that, I want to say thank you to everyone at SGRP for putting the conference together, and I'm handing it off to Andreas Raisch with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thanks, Haley. That was a great presentation. And yep, just a reminder for folks as we get Andreas's presentation loaded, if you do have questions during this, during the pop-up talks, feel free to either post them on the questions tab so you can remember what your questions were as you move along, or write them down so we can ask everyone questions on their presentations at the end. And with that, yep, we'll turn it over to Andreas.
Do you guys see my screen?
Yes, you're all set.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Andreas Raisch. I'm a biological science technician with the United States Fish and Wildlife Service. So my presentation is a look into spring run fry emergence for the 2018 and 2019 sampling seasons in the San Joaquin River. So spring run Chinook emergence trap monitoring began in 2018 to assess the percent survival and to quantify fry counts, to assess environmental parameters and seeing how they correlate to egg to fry emergence and survival, as well as to assess emergence timing. These will assist the program in determining if the program's population target of greater than or equal to 50% or about 2,100 fry per red are being met in the spawning habitat. For the sake of time though, we're just going to be focusing on the first objective. So emergence trap monitoring takes place from roughly November to March. Reds are selected based on various factors such as depth, velocity, and ease of access to the site. Emergence traps are installed prior to emergence around 600 ATUs or accumulated thermal units, which is cumulative temperature over time where 1 ATU equals 1 degree Celsius for 1 day. So traps are checked 2 to 4 times per week depending on the frequency of emergence, with all fish being measured, aged, and then ultimately released. DNA samples are taken on various fish throughout the season to track parentage. Once emergence has subsided, all traps are excavated excavated to look for any entombed fry or unhatched eggs. And then at the same time, this is when CDFW conducts their incubation habitat and substrate monitoring. So here's kind of how it works. So you have the emergence trap, which is positioned upstream in the water column, where the net usually covers the egg pocket and a majority of the red. So yeah, the water is flowing downstream into the trap, which then permeates through the gravel. The salmon then hatch and are gently pushed downstream into the collection jar at the bottom of the trap. Little animation. And so once they're in the collection jar, this is where we can access them and we can do all our sampling, such as aging, measuring, and taking our DNA samples. So here's a map of the 2018 and 2019 emergence trap locations. In the upper left, we have all 5 reaches of the San Joaquin River restoration area, with our sampling pretty much occurring in the upper portion of reach 1. So in 2018, we had a total of 165 fry, with 6 of the 10 traps producing fish. So it gave us an average of about 16.5 fish per trap, or 0.54%. So we did much better in 2019 with 8,424 total fry, with all 12 traps producing fish. So this gave us an average of about 702 fish per trap, or about 21.62%. So while 2019 was much more successful than 2018, we're still a bit under that 50% program target. So here's just a graph showing the number of emerged fry by survey week, with week 1 being about very late October and week 16 being about mid-February. So we had the bulk of our emergence occur between weeks 5 through 8, about here, which is roughly about 750 to 1,000 ATUs. So week 5 is around late November, week 8 is about late December. So most of the emergence occurring in the month of December, or the peak. And then you can see that 2018 and 2019, though, were pretty similar with their peak emergence kind of, occurring between that week 5 and week 8 time span. Here's a couple more graphs looking at mean temperature and mean dissolved oxygen for 2018 and 2019. So these data points were all taken with the YSI during our trap checks and are all just single point measurements, averaged. So for temperature, there doesn't appear to be much of a difference between 2018 and 2019, with maybe slightly cooler temperatures in 2018. For dissolved oxygen, though, you can see there does appear to be a higher dissolved oxygen in 2019 than 2018, although we aren't exactly sure why. It's just kind of what we experienced. So what's next? We should continue our annual monitoring to evaluate egg to fry survival variability across water year types, which will aid in quantifying the quality spawning habitat and identify where spawning habitat restoration actions can be focused. And next, like Donnie mentioned yesterday briefly, a trap effects pilot study to determine the effects, if any, emergent traps may have on the red environment. So I'd like to thank San Joaquin River Restoration Program and the Bureau of Reclamation for funding this monitoring effort. And I'd also like to thank all the other collaborating agencies with all their help through this whole process. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andreas, for the presentation. I liked your animation. That was a good one. Next, we'll go to Trent Sherman from the California Department of Water Resources.
Hi, my name is Trent Sherman, and I'm an engineering geologist for California's Department of Water Resources. Today, I'll be giving an introduction to DWR's Spawning Habitat Adaptive Management Plan, what we call the SHAMP. First, I'll explain what the SHAMP is, I'll talk about its organization and contents, I'll show you some of its developments, and then we'll discuss the next steps. The SHAMP is both a short-term and a long-term plan that outlines a pathway to begin improving spring-run salmon spawning habitat in Reach 1A of the San Joaquin River. This path forward is split into 5 phases that span from planning to implementation, and then post-project monitoring for a number of different projects. Recently, Phase 1 is nearing completion, so let's chat about that. Phase 1 is ultimately a problem statement and a tool for developing project designs. It consists of background information summarizing program documents and several studies that were performed on the San Joaquin and its tributaries. The background also lists the major findings of those studies with respect to limitations on salmon spawning habitat. From those studies, we conclude that primary limiting factors on fry production are the river's temperature, the riverbed's low permeability, and the total amount of suitable spawning habitat. This conclusion helped narrow our focus on what types of improvement projects to build and where to build them. For starters, we limit these projects to the upper 7 miles below Fryant Dam because that's where consistently suitable water temperatures are found for spring-run Chinook. This area extends from Fryant Dam down to Little Dry Creek. Next, we describe the types of river channel improvements that would enhance or increase the spawning habitat, quality, and quantity. This could include cleansing the riverbed of sand, injecting new gravel, altering channel morphology, and controlling sand sources. With time, new projects will shift their focus toward improving and maintaining natural river processes that control spawning and incubation habitat. Phase 1 then identifies 10 potential project sites and describes what can be improved there. Briefly, here are some figures illustrating those sites. Each figure below shows natural red locations, polygons outlining suitable spawning habitat, and it points out specific conditions that could be improved near the outlined areas. As seen here, sites 1 and 2 are located near North Fork Bridge. Sites 3 and 4 are located near the hatchery. Sites 5 and 6 are at the lower end of Lost Lake. Sites 7 and 8 are located around Ledger Island. As an example, here's a picture of the eroding sandbank just south of Ledger Island within the Project 8 footprint. This area is identified as a sand source that could be impacting incubation habitat farther downstream. Site 9 is at Riffle Cluster 40. Site 10 is near Little Dry Creek toward the end of the 7-mile stretch of suitable spring-run spawning temperatures. The next steps after Phase 1 are to vet and prioritize each of the 10 proposed project sites. The top-ranked sites will be designed, permitted, and implemented. After implementation, post-project monitoring will be performed with the intent of describing the project's effectiveness at reaching its goals. The process starts over with Phase 2 as lessons learned are applied and we adaptively manage. And lastly, we recognize the value of measuring the added benefit to salmon production from each project. We'd like to hear from other organizations who are currently monitoring baseline conditions, as well as those who are interested in leading monitoring efforts to quantify the geomorphic and biological responses to these projects. If you're interested, please reach out to us. And thanks again for listening.
Great, thank you, Trent. And again, just a reminder for everybody, as you do have questions for these, we will have all the pop-up talk presenters available at the end of the session to answer questions. So do keep your questions on hand as we progress through the session. Next up, we'll have Dr. Steve Blumenshine from the California State University, Fresno. And Steve, I can see you, but your screen, there we go. Perfect, you're all set. Or at least it looks good over here. But we can't hear you right now. One sec, let me make sure you're not muted.
There we go.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So just today I want to give a quick update on our ongoing work on juvenile Chinook salmon and their habitat, especially focusing on Reach 1. And so a lot of our research in the restoration program has always tried to focus on restoration goals for mutual benefits. So for example, the program, of course, is interested in whether the San Joaquin River can grow and export juvenile Chinook. Gerald mentioned yesterday a number on the order of 1 million fish, for example. Well, what we're interested in particularly is what's the carrying capacity of the river? In other words, how much production of juvenile Chinook could we expect given habitat conditions, which are going to vary from year to year? And our approach to that is based on energetics. So we could assess the habitat and habitat conditions and apply bioenergetics and habitat models to address this question of the carrying capacity. So I think our overall approach is best exemplified by this conceptual model I used in a recent proposal. So another thing Gerald mentioned yesterday was reconciliation of water uses. So we know that the San Joaquin River water is vastly overcommitted to a number of sources. There's water allocated to the restoration program, and you want to make sure that's used efficiently. So in order to best do that, we need to understand habitat and Chinook salmon needs. And our approach incorporates critical variables like food supply and water temperatures, which we can incorporate in bioenergetics approaches to better understand the probability of success and high production of juvenile salmon. The reality is that there's only a certain amount of water allocated to the program, and we know that that, for example, is related to temperature. I think we've seen that in a number of the presentations. So for example, in drought years, we see low water release, high temperatures, especially downriver of the dam. And under those conditions, the juvenile Chinook are going to need more food, but those relationships are really vastly understudied. Currently, the kind of paradigm or the prevailing temperature thresholds are from EPA Region 10 for optimum and critical levels. And Towns mentioned that yesterday, but some recent research, while becoming not so recent, shows that some of the optima for critical metabolic variables like consumption, growth, and respiration are maybe a bit higher, which is good news for restoring this population, which is the southernmost one in the United States. And something we see in low water years like 2014, which is a drought year, is that up near the dam, the water temperatures are fairly constantly cool, but later in the rearing period downriver, things tend to get a little warm, but maybe that's not that great of a concern if it's near these metabolic optima, for example. Well, tying together the temperatures with food supply, I want to show some preliminary data that we have from this last cohort year. So what I'm showing here are drifting invertebrate concentrations, number per cubic meter captured in drift nets. And this data is averaged from August to April. And so it's interesting that we see decreasing abundances of drift downriver, and downriver where it's going to tend to be warm and there'd be a greater demand for prey by fish. So we want to combine these data with our other measures to work towards how much production these different areas can support. So that's a little bit of what we found, and then what needs doing, for example, is addressing this issue we've seen. So in the past, we've estimated very high growth rates of Chinook salmon in the river, but those aren't necessarily predicted by the in-stream model, which incorporates drift and benthic prey, and that suggests perhaps there's some missing energy. So for example, recent work by Rob Lusardi and his colleagues at Davis in the Shasta River showed that macroinvertebrates can have 9 times higher density in macrophyte beds compared to the adjacent open water as measured by drift. And everyone who's been on the river or looked at overhead images like this are aware of these, especially in wintertime, extensive submergent and emergent macrophyte beds, like we see here from a canoe view. And sure enough, if you grab some of this stuff and shake it out in a pan of water, you'll see a flurry of activity. We've looked at hundreds of samples in the lab, and what we see in the macrophyte samples compared to the open water drift or benthos are an abundance of these large-bodied prey like damselfly nymphs and amphipods. That's good energy for juvenile Chinook and could probably fuel a lot of their growth. On a larger scale, we want to really understand how much macrophyte habitat there is, and we're looking at some drone imaging we have obtained from a former student, and I also talked with Matt Myers yesterday with DWR about some of the drone imaging they have to catalog reds, so that could be a really valuable tool in our objectives. And also, we're working with Steve Railsback, who developed the in-stream model. And the idea there would be to include macrophyte habitat along with drift and benthic prey in estimating the survivorship and growth of juvenile Chinook in the San Joaquin River Restoration Reach. So overall conclusions, we're also sampling prey in the riverbed and drift, and also the physical variables there like temperature and velocity, covering 4 sites. And a wish list for Christmas would be someone needs to invent a device to record juvenile salmon thermal experiences. But short of that, we're working with Zach and his group on looking at the recaptures and the rotary screw traps to understand what temperatures fish are experiencing in the river and the growth rates that they manifest from that. And our preliminary results show about 10 times more invertebrates in macrophyte samples than in the adjacent open water drift habitat. And we're getting ready to ramp up year 2, so we'll see what kind of water year we have. All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Appreciate the presentation. I have questions for you, but I'll wait till the end. Next, we're going to go to Dave Encinas from the California Department of Water Resources.
Good morning. My name is Dave Encinas, and I'm an engineer with the California Department of Water Resources. Today I'm going to give you a brief overview of one of our projects on the San Joaquin River, the Milburn Pond Isolation Project. I'll touch on some of the background on why the project is being developed and then go over the project goals and some of its planned features before providing a brief summary of our current effort. Our project is a pit isolation project, and what pit isolation means is physically separating gravel pit ponds from the river channel so that fish cannot pass back and forth. This type of action is part of the Phase 2 improvements listed in paragraph 11 of the Stipulation of Settlement and is meant to protect juvenile salmonids. Fisheries studies have also shown a need for pit isolation on the river, and Milburn Pond has been identified as one of the highest priority pits based on a DWR evaluation and fisheries study data by other program experts. The project site is in Reach 1A of the Restoration Reach of the river, adjacent to the city of Fresno. This aerial shows the project area, which is approximately 352 acres and is almost completely within the San Joaquin River Ecological Reserve. About 242 acres of the project area is the Milburn Pond itself, and 1.5 miles of river channel passes through from the right to left in this photo. The main berm separating the pond from the river is breached in the area of this circle, which provides a constant connection between the river and the pond, while 2 more locations on the berm connect during higher flows. In 2019, DWR completed a preliminary project design after working in collaboration with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and San Joaquin River Conservancy and feedback from San Joaquin River Restoration Program agency staff. The design included features that can be grouped into 3 themes with distinct goals. First, pit isolation features will separate the river channel from the pond. Second, channel and floodplain improvements will improve fish and riparian habitat. And third, potential public access improvements in the form of fishing facilities and trails. Agencies agreed that each of these 3 portions of the plan have different levels of priority, with the pit isolation step being the highest priority. DWR has since begun its current effort with funding from the Conservancy and DWR's restoration program funds to develop the pit isolation phase. The goals of the current project are to reduce the possibility of fish movement from the river to the pond and vice versa, reduce the potential for a future breach during floods, and to minimize negative impacts on habitat within the pond as a result of isolating the pit. This figure shows the current pit isolation plan with berm improvements along the top, where new portions of berm will be constructed on the pond side of the existing berm, and a new section of berm constructed to cut off the existing connection. Additional features include an equalization saddle to allow water to fill the pond during high flow releases, helping protect the berm from damage, and drains under the saddle that will allow water to seep into the pond during low flows so that the pond will not drop much in this hot summer months. And you also may notice a feature in the upper right of this figure, which is what we are calling a high flow channel. This is a side channel that will function during high flows and is included in this phase because it will allow us a material source for berm construction. So what's happening now? Currently, we're working on collecting additional data and refining our design and working through the CEQA process. We expect to complete an EIR for the pit isolation phase in early 2021, complete design in 2022, obtain permits also in 2022, and construct the project hopefully in 2023. Our current funding covers those first two items, CEQA and design. That's a very brief overview of our project. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Dave. All right, moving right along. Our next talk is from Meiling Colombano from the National Marine Fisheries Service. So Meiling, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. All right, hi everyone, I'm Meiling Colombano. I'm a fish biologist with the National Marine Fisheries Service, and today I'll be talking about green sturgeon. Oh, can I advance this slide?
It looks like it's on a PDF.
Yeah, sorry, Meiling, use the toolbar at the top up here.
Oh. Okay, got it. All right, so first off, I want to go over the life cycle for the southern distinct population segment of North American green sturgeon, which is the species I'll be focusing on. So adults return to natal rivers to spawn around age 15, so very long-lived species. They spawn every 3 to 5 years. Spawning typically occurs from April through July in the Sacramento River watershed. Eggs are sticky and adhere to gravel substrate in cool, deep pools. Eggs hatch within about 10 days, and after 45 days, fish begin to move downstream, and they enter the Bay Delta around age 1. Juveniles will live and feed in the Bay Delta anywhere from ages 1 to 5, and then subadults will enter the ocean, again, anywhere from ages 1 to 5 years old. And then they'll enter and feed in bays and estuaries along the West Coast, all the way from Alaska to Mexico. All right, and here are a couple of maps. On the left is a map showing the geographic distribution of subadults and adults while they're in the ocean. So like I said, all the way from Alaska through Mexico, and then they'll enter and feed in bays all along the West Coast. And then I just wanted to point out the red line in California there, which is the Sacramento River, is the only known spawning area for the species. And the map on the right is zoomed into the Central Valley. On the bottom of the map, I just generally highlighted the program area to orient folks. In the middle, highlighted in purple, is the legal boundary of the Delta. And then at the top of the map, highlighted in yellow in the main stem Sacramento. And then it's hard to see, but a little bit in the Feather River and a little bit in the Yuba River are the only known and documented spawning locations for the Southern DPS on the entire West Coast. So as you might imagine, between having very limited spawning habitat, being a long-lived species, and then amongst a variety of other reasons, they were listed as threatened in 2006 under the Endangered Species Act. Thank you. So in 2018, NMFS issued a green sturgeon recovery plan. It does focus on the Sacramento River because that is the main spawning area. However, I just wanted to point out some main points regarding the San Joaquin River. And so historically, the San Joaquin could have supported green sturgeon spawning, but there is no documentation. Green sturgeon do currently use the lower San Joaquin River, and there is research needed to be done to determine if habitat could support successful spawning of adults and rearing of larvae. And basically, a lot of monitoring is needed in the San Joaquin River. But with the recent captures of green sturgeon in 2017 in the Stanislaus and just this past April in the main stem San Joaquin, it's good to keep green sturgeon in mind for these long-term passage designs that are currently underway. So here's a list of general recommendations. Please note these are not criteria. You can see my poster for a list of more specific recommendations for passage designs. There have been some technical glitches in getting my poster slides up on the website, so if you still are only seeing my presentation slides, please feel free to email me and I can send you my poster slides. So in general, sturgeon are benthic cruising. They cruise along the bottom and they don't jump. They require both upstream and downstream passage for adults. Adults can oversummer in the river if there's adequate water temperature and food available. They need to be able to pass along the bottom, so no plunging flows. Sturgeon cannot navigate eddies. It disorients them. Sturgeon like substrate and large rocks for resting or hunkering down in, and they cannot navigate large drops or 90-degree turns. And then lastly, sturgeon don't really bend front to back, they bend sideways. Next slide, please. Not sure I'm controlling it. Oh. All right, and then lastly, I just want to go over some example monitoring that could be done. So one great low-cost option is environmental DNA or eDNA, which is a great tool to monitor for the presence, absence of green sturgeon in the San Joaquin, particularly during the spring and early summer months when they might be there. Another one is passive integrated transponder or PIT tagging of sturgeon that might be incidentally caught in salmonid monitoring or other monitoring. And then likewise, communicating with other agencies or efforts that might also be tagging sturgeon, not only in the Central Valley, but in California. And then also thinking about incorporating pit tag arrays or antennas at passage facilities, which would also have the dual benefit of for salmonid monitoring as well. And then lastly, I just want to put a plug in for the talk coming up right after mine, a great tool looking at the habitat suitability in the program area under different flow and temperature scenarios to see where sturgeon could possibly access and hold in the program area. That concludes my talk, and thank you all for attending the science meeting.
Thanks, Meiling, and that's a perfect segue right into the next talk for Dr. Mark Tompkins, who's a member of the Technical Advisory Committee for the San Joaquin River Restoration Program. All yours, Mark.
All right, I'm trying to make sure I'm showing the right screen, which I don't think it is. So hold on one second here. Are you just seeing my, sorry,
Mark,
you just
in your GoToWebinar control panel, there should be a tab that says sharing. If you open that and go to show screen and drop down. Yeah, there you go.
You got it, yeah.
I think I've got it. There we go. Okay, let me just put this in presentation mode. I apologize here. I thought I had this all worked out. Apparently not.
It's always harder when you're in the hot seat, no worries.
And I'm gonna go to slideshow beginning. And then I'm gonna go to
If you go to display settings at the top and do switch view. Yeah, there you go. We got it.
You seeing it now?
Yes.
Yep. Sorry about that. Okay, hi everybody, and thank you, Meiling. What a great presentation and lead into my quick presentation here. So just talking a bit about a modeling effort and a tool that we've developed in the Technical Advisory Committee. I'm Mark Tompkins. I'm a geomorphologist and engineer and one of the members of the San Joaquin Restoration Program TAC. So what we're going to talk about just quickly, you know, most of the focus is on spring run salmon, but of course, as Meiling just laid out, sturgeon are important too, and they have different habitat and passage requirements than Chinook. And so there are questions about the program infrastructure, design, operations of facilities and flow management that need to consider sturgeon, as Meiling just laid out. And Renee Henry, one of the other members of the TAC, has been working with the Fish Forum in the program, and there's been this desire to try and pull together some of the sturgeon information on habitat and passage. So that's what I'm going to quickly show here today. So the TAC, with input and support from implementing agencies, developed this web tool, and our initial focus has been on just looking sort of preliminarily, I'd say, at different kind of flow scenarios and how that could affect sturgeon moving up to and through the program area. So I'll go here quickly to, sorry, skipped over a couple slides. So just What I'm going to focus on is the tool itself here at the top of the schematic, but I want to give everybody a quick tour of what feeds into it. So we have hydraulic information, depths and velocities, and then we have temperatures, and then using some suitability criteria for those three things, we identify the suitable and unsuitable areas. So to get that information, we are using a hydraulic model that DWR provided. And then hydrology that comes out of a flow routing model that is also related to a temperature model that provides us with the temperatures. So I'm not going to go into any more detail. There's a lot of moving parts here, but it comes together in the tool that you'll see next. So the hydraulic model has a lot of good coverage. Even though it's one dimensional, we feel like it's a good representation of conditions for sturgeon passage. And then the temperature model has quite a lot of nodes, and what we essentially did is lined up the data in corresponding areas from these two models to have the output in the tool. This is what the tool looks like, and you can play around with it. I can put this link in the chat window for folks, but basically what it has is on the left-hand panel here, you can pick different flow scenarios. We've actually got the most recent 5 years of actual flows. And then you can pick how you want to screen the information, either spawning criteria or migration criteria. And then you can essentially navigate through time and see the hydrograph here. And then on the right-hand side, you're going to see the suitability. If you picked spawning, it would be suitability for spawning. And you can see then flows in different routes of the channel. And I won't go into all the detail there. Again, people are welcome to play with this, but basically, the main river channel, the migration route, which would be the connected part, which sometimes includes both channel and bypass, and then the bypasses themselves. So then what I was going to do, just to give folks an idea, was go through a quick example of how the TAC has begun to use this and how we think it has value. So those uses are basically looking at passage conditions under different flows, where habitat creation might make sense given where sturgeon could be, and then how flow and temperature management actions, in addition to the physical improvements in passage conditions, might help sturgeon. So just a little example here, looking at the water year 2019, basically starting, October of 2018. And I'm just going to go to a couple different months to kind of show you how you can play around with this. The conditions would still have been preventing sturgeon essentially from getting into the restoration program area in October. So then switching to something like February, you've got better conditions, and I cheated a little bit here. There looks like there's just a little bit of unsuitable passage habitat at the downstream end, but potentially sturgeon could be moving up a little ways till they hit more red, where the passage conditions are not quite as good. And then fast forwarding to June, which I think does line up with what Meiling laid out in the spawning time windows in her presentation. You have essentially in 2019, you had passage all the way up. So, sturgeon could be moving all the way to reach 1 in that case. And then this is what we wanted to really evaluate, is like, then you've got flows dropping after June, at least in this water year, for example. And so, with the sturgeon maybe having moved upstream and then passage conditions degrading back downstream, is that going to cause problems? And there are things we could do with either flow management. Obviously, the fish passage improvements will help with these kinds of things. But this is a brand new tool, and just wanted to let folks be aware of it. And the TAC will probably be continuing to work with the Fish Forum to identify ways to help manage for sturgeon in the program. And I think that's it. I just wanted to acknowledge a whole bunch of people: Alexis at DWR, Blair at Reclamation for modeling the whole TAC, Katrina, who most of you probably know, used to be with the program, now is at Scott McBain, and then a couple of my team members, Bethany and Emmanuel, who really pulled together most of the online tool. And with that, I will wrap up. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. If you don't mind, would you mind posting the link to that tool into the chat so everyone can take a look at it from the meeting?
Yeah, you bet. I'll do that right now.
Thank you. So our final presentation for the 2020 Science Meeting is from Dr. Lauren Yamane from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So Lauren, it's all yours.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and see your slides well.
Okay, great. Thanks for hanging in there, everyone. As Emily said, my name is Lauren Yamane. I'm a fish biologist statistician with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the San Joaquin River Restoration Program's Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan. And I'd like to first start off by acknowledging that this really is a broader effort of all of the agencies involved and members of the RA-TAC team, and in particular, folks from the long-term monitoring plan subgroups. So big thanks to everyone for your hard work on this document. Okay, let's see. All right. So as a reminder, the San Joaquin River Restoration Settlement outlined two major goals, the water management goal and the restoration goal. Monitoring is needed to ensure that progress is made towards that restoration goal, which we all know by now, is to restore and maintain fish populations in good condition within the restoration area. All right, so the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan will provide a comprehensive monitoring plan that identifies monitoring data needed to assess progress towards that restoration goal, satisfy regulatory needs and compliance needs, and inform program implementation and management decisions. It describes habitat and population monitoring objectives that specifically address quantitative objectives from program guidance documents, as well as provides example approaches. So just some notes on scope and caveats for the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan. It currently focuses on spring run Chinook salmon monitoring only, although future versions of the document may consider monitoring needs for fall run and other native fishes as well. It includes monitoring both prior to volitional passage and also once volitional passage is achieved throughout the restoration area for all life stages of spring run. And very importantly, the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan is a living document, so it's going to be reassessed and revised over time, and currently it's a draft in preparation. Okay, so as alluded to previously, the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan builds on previous program documents. So starting with the Fisheries Management Plan in 2010, which really provided a foundational understanding for the program of the opportunities and challenges involved with reintroducing Chinook salmon into the restoration area, and provided program habitat and population monitoring goals and objectives. And then the fisheries framework in 2018 really honed in on some of those population and habitat objectives with more quantitative goals, and then also provided an updated schedule of implementation for the program based on timing of key construction activities and biological targets. So the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan includes habitat monitoring. So some of that will be based on stream temperature and more broadly water quality, as well as habitat connectivity. So specifically focused on fish passage and screening project effectiveness, as well as monitoring physical habitat. So things like revegetation project assessments, floodplain habitat monitoring, and then spawning and incubation habitat as well, and then restoration flow management monitoring. And then finally, the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan will include monitoring based on the life cycle of spring run, starting with those adults that return to the restoration area and then move up into reach one to hold and spawn and produce eggs and fry. And then those fry that emigrate and rear throughout the restoration area and finally leave. So for both habitat and population monitoring, the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan will also include things like the frequency, methods, duration, and location of monitoring, as well as binning monitoring activities into program implementation phases. So in this way, the Fisheries Long-Term Monitoring Plan will continue the program's planning process for achieving the restoration goal by providing a basis to assess progress toward successful reintroduction of spring run Chinook salmon, and also the data needed to identify additional restoration needs. And with that, I'll say thanks for hanging in there, and thank you to the organizers of this conference.
Thanks, Lauren. I think that was a perfect way to, perfect last presentation for the meeting to kind of wrap it all together. Although we're not totally done yet, we do have some time for questions for the pop-up talk presenters. So maybe if the pop-up talk presenters would like to kind of pop back on here, you guys can turn on your webcams and answer a few questions from the audience. Although to give everyone time to come up with questions, I wanted to start with one, and this one is for Haley and Trent and possibly Dave Encinas as well. I was curious, it sounds like you guys are doing some similar work in Reach 1, just in terms of the SHAMP, the spawning habitat adaptive management plan, and also the work that's going on with creating potential habitat at Ball Ranch. So I was just curious if you guys are coordinating on that effort or how the two projects will work together, whether it's yeah, just in general. And I wasn't quite sure where the exactly where the gravel pit is, Dave, that you guys are working on, and also the channel reach. But just curious how all that fits together in terms of work going on in Reach 1 to create more spawning habitat for salmon. And
well, I guess I can kick this off as far as talking about the SHAMP. Recently, we've been collaborating in a committee, a group called the Spawning and Incubation Group. And so I shared my copy of the SHAMP, and as far as it's gotten at this point, and asked that group for feedback and comments on it. So we've been working together on that. Dave has been helping out as far as giving technical reviews on that as well. So I guess I would say it's an iterative process, and we're starting to reach out and collaborate more. That's begun recently. And as far as the project at Ball Ranch that Haley was talking about today, that was the first I had heard of it. Sounds really interesting, so I'd definitely like to talk more about that with her in the future.
cool, thanks, Trent. Let's see, does anyone from the audience, if you guys have a question for the attendees, just go ahead and raise your hand at this point. I don't want you to have to type out your question and then for me to read it. But I did also, while folks are working on that, and Craig or Josh, if you see an attendee who has raised their hand, just feel free to call on them. So I'm not just scanning the list as well. But I had a question. Thank you. Yeah, I also had a question for Steve Blumenshine. I know you were talking about how you saw more macroinvertebrates and macrophytes, more bugs and macrophytes on the river. And I guess when I think about floating vegetation like that in the San Joaquin River, I think about a lot of water hyacinth. So I was just curious, is that also something you see in non-native vegetation, like hyacinth that's floating in the river, or is that mostly something that you've observed in native or desirable aquatic vegetation? Oh, and Steve, you're on mute right now.
Sorry. Well, it's desirable if it grows a lot of fish food, but we did some recon surveys, you know, canoeing and talking to people who are on the river quite a bit, a lot more than we're able to. And we're looking at water primrose, parrot feather, and elodea. Those seem the predominant ones. You know what I mean? If we were to sample everything, you start multiplying your sampling effort. We generate so many samples. We had to look at, you know, most representative habitat sampling, and so we identified those macrophyte types as being most worth the limited resources you have for processing the resulting samples. We'll keep a lookout for that hyacinth though, that's for sure.
There's definitely a lot of it in the San Joaquin River. All right, let's see. Any other questions from the audience? I don't want to take up everyone's time here, but let's see. Maybe it's just getting too close to lunchtime.
Nothing yet. Oh, wait a minute, Mike Thomas. I'm gonna unmute you now.
Right.
Hello, all. Thanks for putting all of this on. This is fantastic to see the combination of salmonid and sturgeon interest being joined together on the San Joaquin. So fantastic work. My first question was for Mark. I was curious if they had thought about implementing some of the suitability criteria that have been taken off of the upper Sacramento River down in the San Joaquin.
Yeah, like I said, we haven't done a whole lot of analysis yet, but actually when we talked with the Fish Forum, that was one of the things that we discussed and I think are planning to add to the tool is the ability to change suitability criteria so that you can look a little bit at the sensitivity to that if you were to be using, you know, different depth, velocity, or even temperature criteria. Does that help?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of point you guys in that direction because there is a wealth of information over 10 years worth of monitoring up there that you guys could really tap into and sort of think about the San Joaquin. The second point that I did want to make was more along Steve's line, but I think in thinking about the macro invertebrate community in the San Joaquin, what benefits that you would have in terms of energetics for salmonid would also transition over to larval and young of the year sturgeon as well. And that's it.
So I got a question. Can I do a question? So this is for Haley. Hi, Haley.
Hi, Steve.
I don't think we met yet, but when you're talking about Ball Ranch, that's like right in our backyard here, you know, which is interesting. So, you know, the 5 minutes talks, we don't get to flesh everything out, but were you guys going to be creating side channel and floodplain habitat or work with existing forms to get those in, the existing landforms to get those inundated?
Yeah, so unfortunately, yeah, with 5 minutes, we don't have a ton of time to go super into detail. But we have a couple of plans right now that we're working with an engineering firm to kind of firm up a little bit on what we think is going to be the best choice with the funding and the landforms that are out there right now. And so we're considering doing a combination of building a side channel that will connect from it's what used to be what appears to be kind of a historic side channel that's been filled in, and we weren't sure if that was because of the cultural work that's been out there or the gravel mining activities or what, but it would be opening that back up and restoring, you know, what used to be a historic side channel. And additionally, whether we want to be breaking into the river itself to open up again what used to be historic floodplains, which were closed off when the gravel mine kind of went in there and refilled in a lot of the areas out there. So it's still a work in progress, how much area we're going to be opening up and what exactly we're going to be doing out there, but that's hopefully something that, you know, we can bring in and talk about probably next year.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and Peter Forster had his hand up, and so did then Tom and then Andy Shriver. Peter, you still there?
Yeah, I'm. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, a question for Sothea. Great presentation on the Van Clief diversion project. And has DWR, either by itself or working with Cal Fish and Wildlife, built upon the diversion survey that Fish and Wildlife did about 20 years ago and identified other places where you could do similar, you know, where there's these fish passage potential barriers associated with diversions, screened and unscreened diversions? Do you have any like update to those diversion surveys? Are you planning to do any kind of updates so you can, you know, use your expertise to help the program out in terms of mitigating some of those unscreened diversions as well as passage barriers?
what we're going off of right now is the original task 2 barriers that we have identified, and currently the only diversion that we're looking at is the Van Clief diversion, and we have updated or collected some additional survey data. So we do
Okay,
have.
Well, I mean, I would maybe I would encourage maybe Cal Fish and Wildlife and DWR maybe to use their combined expertise to update the diversion survey that was done, a very comprehensive and detailed diversion survey that went from Reach 1 down to Reach 5. So I'm more than happy to work with DWR if they can help out with that also.
Okay.
Okay. So Tom Biglione, you there?
Yes, Tom Biglione. I may have missed it earlier, but when we were talking about invasive plants, in particular Francis, I was just focusing on the terrestrial ones that he spoke of. But in the river earlier this summer, I saw really dense stands of, I'm assuming it was water hyacinth at Mendota Pool and upriver for almost a quarter of a mile. Also over at the Intertie area, the river was almost completely covered by water plants. So I have to assume that along great stretches out there, that's the case with the nutrients and the water temperature. But what's going to be done to manage those populations?
Was that question
It's for
river
anyone.
partners? Francis, I think you're on mute right now.
I think I am.
What now?
Oh yeah, there you are. You're good.
All right. Yeah, like you mentioned at the start, yeah, for this grant, we're mainly focused on like the terrestrial invasives, but yeah, we've seen the same thing along our properties on the lower San Joaquin and at the confluence of the Tuolumne. And so it's been something that's on our radar, and I think at least for us, it's just finding the right grant or the right program to apply to and hopefully get some of this work done. But I mean, at least to my knowledge, River Partners hasn't done a whole lot of work, in the channel as far as removing invasives, but it's definitely something that it's on our radar.
Okay, Andy Shriver, you're self-muted.
Hi, thanks. Hi, everyone. I really enjoyed all those pop-up talks. It's really exciting to see all the work that's being done on the river. And particularly some of the projects that we're seeing on the river with Ball Ranch, the Champ, Milburn, and even downstream for Van Clief and on with that. Something, it's not a particular question, but with all these projects on the river that we're seeing, I just wanted to kind of bring it up to everyone's attention since we're all here together right now is having spent a lot of time on the river, we definitely, as a program, and I think recreationally for the public, have very little river access to launch our watercraft, whether that's drift boats, jet boats, kayaks, etc. So even though you probably are progressing with the projects and securing funding, if there's ever any opportunity to increase water access for watercraft within your projects, please consider that. It would be really helpful for continuing monitoring and studies of the program.
Well, thanks, Andy. And I think with that last comment, we are out of time for question and answer. So thanks everybody who did a pop-up talk. I thought they were all fantastic. I love the pop-up talks. They're such fun little snippets of information and always leave with more questions. So thank you guys, and assume there'd be a rousing round of applause right now if you guys are actually on stage. So I appreciate all of your time. There we go. All right. Yay. Well, this concludes our final session for the science meeting. But we do want to pass it over to Don Ports just for some concluding remarks at the very end. But generally, really appreciate all your time and attendance, and for everyone taking the time to spend the last 2 days with us to learn more about the restoration program. All right, it's all yours, Don.